we run this on a Wednesday to see what areas are going to be covered. So welcome everybody to this live webinar. Today we're looking at what more can you do with a permanent residency? Is a permanent residency worth it or not? There are different stages. So let's run through that and see what we've been doing in our residency program. So we're running a series in our Living and Working Abroad channel for expats that are living and working abroad. They could be working, they could be just living, they could be retired or just investors living abroad, or it could be just a new start, or it could be returning to family adventures. Whatever your reason for being living and working abroad, contact us at ProACTPartnership.com and subscribe to our YouTube channel for living and working abroad to follow the series on residency and tax for your jurisdiction. So let's first of all, let's have a look at the progress that could be made. Generally, around the world, there is short stays that are available for 90 days. Whether with or without a visa, a short stay travel for business or holiday or visits is generally allowed up to 90 days. In the Schengen zone, they make that very difficult because you're limited to 90 days in 180 days. That makes the Schengen zone particularly difficult, which is the EU mostly, but also some additional non-EU countries that belong to the EEA, including Switzerland, Norway, Iceland. Some EU countries aren't yet in the Schengen zone, but they're applied to join. The only one that hasn't is Ireland. So if you want to stay beyond the 90 days, then a visitor's visa comes in. Now, around the world, this works for lots of different countries. And you can go to a country on a short stay, want to stay longer and apply in country to stay for a longer period of time on a visitor's visa up to, say, 1 year. You could do that in the UK, but in Ireland, you would have to apply for that longer stay permit before you enter Ireland. But then what we discussed recently is you go beyond that to a resident permit. And what a resident permit does is that it gives you a right to remain and enjoy certain benefits from that lifestyle. That can include access to education for children, the ability to buy land, and the ability to become a tax resident in that country. So a resident permit, and to work. So a resident permit provides additional extra benefits. Plus, you can stay beyond that short stay period of 90 days and 180. So if anybody has got a restriction with the Schengen zone, getting a resident permit in that country, in the EU, would remove them of that. But generally around any country, then that would work as well. But what we're looking at here today is a permanent residency. Now, this is the next step. What we call a resident permit or resident certificate or long stay visa is just that. It's a temporary thing. It lasts for a limited amount of time and will need renewing. So you've got all the rights of living in that country, but you could be asked to leave or not allowed to stay again. Once you go to residence permits, they've got three key advantages over a temporary residency permit. Universally, you'll be offered healthcare according to the state provisions in that country. You're allowed to stay for a limited period of time. Your permanent residence certificate might need renewing every 5 years, every 10 years, but it is a permanent status. But it's also a pathway to citizenship. So generally, you can't become a citizen until you're a permanent resident. It's the symbol of being a citizen, that you've stayed in the country. It's the proof that you've stayed in the country to get a citizenship or a dual citizenship in that country. So those are the advantages of a permanent residency. But above all that, in the EU countries, permanent residency would also remove you from the short stay restrictions for that country. So let's have a look more about what the implication of the Schengen zone visa system allows. Later in 2023, they're introducing a electronic travel authority for the EU Schengen zone, and it comes with this short stay restriction, so they'll be able to monitor and enforce the 90 in 180-day restrictions. Now, for EU citizens, you've got the freedom of movement to be able to move between the countries, but still only for that 90 days without getting the resident permit. An EU citizen moving within the EU can get that resident permit, but again, it's a temporary thing, and they could lose that right to that depending on a country by country basis. It's got a right to move, but not to stay more than 90 days. You need to get the resident permit. So you've got that temporary resident permit. You can do away with that coming and going by upgrading to your resident permit, and that gives you the right, an unlimited right to remain. And you can be a permanent resident in more than one EU country. But have in mind that your resident permit, your permanent residency, only gives you the advantage over the short stay rules in that one country. So it's freedom of movement between your home country and the country of permanent resident within the Schengen zone, or obviously outside the EU complexity in another country. So once you're a permanent resident green card holder in the States, that is generally not going to be removed from you. If you don't have a permanent residency, you just have a residency permit. For example, one of the tests to upgrade to a permanent residency might be how long you've spent in the country while you've been a temporary resident. So you're going to upgrade to a permanent residence, you've got to have a temporary resident permit already, and you've got to have been in country for a certain amount of time. So different countries have different formulas and different applications, but it can vary. But it might be as little as spending more than 3 months outside the country in 5 years disqualifies you from that permanent residency application. Healthcare is another important thing. Some countries will offer healthcare automatically under the state rules for a resident permit or for somebody that's working in country. But other people won't. So if you're working, or you've got an EU citizen with a health card, or a British citizen with a health card, or you've got what is called an S1, then potentially you can get health cover on a temporary resident permit. But generally, as a permanent resident in any country, you will always be allowed to have access to full healthcare, full state healthcare provision, as well as that unlimited time stay in that country, and your pathway to citizenship. So there are great advantages and cost savings for having a permanent residency over not fulfilling that status, and it secures your right to live and work in that country in the long term. It's quite hard to lose a permanent residency, although obviously when they're renewing your certificate, there is a check on it every few years. So it offers big opportunities. Citizenship is available in some countries after 5 years, but you need to be a permanent resident for at least 12 months to get that citizenship. For other people, the circumstance would be that in other countries you might need to wait 7 to 12 years before you can apply for citizenship. So in that period between 5 and 12 years, the permanent residency gives a certainty as you build your family home and business in that overseas location. If you've got any questions, you can always contact us at proactpartnership.com. Leave your comments on our YouTube channel, subscribe and follow our future broadcasts, and find out more by contacting us for a free consultant review which you can book online at proactpartnership.co.uk. So we talked about the difference, the distinction between citizenship and permanent residency, and the distinction between permanent residency and temporary residency. Different countries have different names, but generally the rules follow the same. And within the EU, the Schengen zone makes the 90 and 180 day rule very hard to follow. Some countries want you to have your visas, your visitors' visas, extended stay visas before you enter the country. Others allow you to process them within country. Within the EU, it's much more constricted, and the electronic travel authorities will enforce it with even more gusto going forward. So let's have a couple of examples of what the benefits of permanent residency are in the EU or other countries. So let's start with Cyprus. The advantage of permanent residency in Cyprus is that you get automatic benefit to state healthcare. If you're a resident permit in Cyprus, you get the permission to work and buy land and pay tax and get education for your children. But you have to pay the social insurance taxes to get the healthcare benefit. Anybody in Cyprus as a permanent resident will always get the full healthcare without having to be working for that. When you look at a country like UK as a contrast to that, the permanent residency, the healthcare is already granted by the fact that you've got a right to remain. So anybody that's been in the UK for more than 6 months as a resident starts to get access to the healthcare, and it's not tied necessarily to national health insurance contributions, just with your right to remain in that country. Permanent residency in the UK is called indefinite leave to remain, but any EU expat with settled status has got, in effect, that indefinite leave to remain, that permanent residency under the EU withdrawal treaty. So they've got the right to work, live, buy property, and remain in the UK. The interesting thing is that post-Brexit, the permanent residency application for anyone that's non-EU, you also need to have employment with an income and a salary over 25,000 a year. So it can be quite expensive to become a permanent residency. Once you've got that permanent residency in the UK, then after another 1 year, you could get citizenship as well. For an individual, obviously when there's family marriage links, you can do that a bit sooner sometimes. In other EU countries like Spain and Holland, as soon as you get a permanent residency in the country, you qualify for the state healthcares. But in other EU countries like Portugal and France, other EU countries like Portugal and France and Germany will offer the healthcare to an early stage as well, before you get that permanent residency. Within the EU, you always get the permanent residency option after 5 years, and with that unlimited right to remain in there. An EU citizen moving within the EU always has the European health card. The social insurance agreements are independent, but they're linked. So if you've got rights to healthcare in one EU country and you move to another one, you're going to get your healthcare rights covered in that country straight away. You're not going to have to wait. If you're non-EU, some countries you can get that healthcare straight away: Portugal, France, Germany. But other countries you would have to wait, like Cyprus and Spain, or unless you're working and contributing into that social insurance system. So if you can get a work permit and get a job, then you can get access to the health service before. So in summary, permanent residency permits. And so in summary, a resident permit for expats in any country abroad gives them a right to indefinitely remain in that country and for an unlimited period of time. The certificate might need renewing, the permanent residency might need renewing, but it does stay with them. They'll get full rights to be in the country indefinitely, which could include healthcare, could include the right to buy property, the right to pay taxes. So you can't register for the health system and taxes until you've got the residency permit. And permanent residency gives that unconditional visa-free, unlimited stay within that country with the rights, equivalent rights of a citizen, other than you're not a citizen, you haven't got a passport, and it's not permanent. Permanent residency is a path to citizenship. For more information on that, follow our YouTube series on residency, and we'll see you again next time. Thanks for listening.